Okay, today's going to be a really important video because the concept we're going to talk about today is something that's really important for you to understand if you want to get better at matcha. And yet, this is a concept that I've never heard properly being explained anywhere else before. And this isn't just hyperbole, even for myself. I had to really study and research how matcha exactly works in order for me to understand this. Now, for example, have you ever wondered why, if you use boiling water to make matcha, it becomes more astringent? And no, it's not because you're burning the leaves like lots of people say. Have you ever wondered why an iced matcha americano and the iced usucha, they taste different, even if you're using the same matcha to water ratio? Have you ever wondered why, if you mix matcha for a longer time, it would taste different? The reason why you don't know this is because all those instructions you heard before are missing one very important key concept. And that's the concept we're going to go over today. Once you understand this, you'll know exactly how or why the temperature affects the taste, the length of the mixing affects the taste, and the grade of the matcha also affects the taste, or affects how you should prepare your matcha as well. So let's go on and boost your matcha IQ. Hi, I'm Yuki, I'm the founder of Tealife, and here we break down Japanese tea so you can become a Japanese tea expert. As always, in this channel, we talk about things you won't hear anywhere else. First of all, everyone knows that you should be using boiling water or 100 degrees Celsius water to mix your matcha. That's a huge no-no. The optimal temperature is between 80 to 85 degrees Celsius, and that's because by using that temperature, you can get the most balanced matcha. So you can get the umami and the sweetness from the matcha, but not only that, you're also able to get the multiple layers of complicated notes, and you can enjoy that while you reduce or minimize the amount of astringency and the bitterness from the matcha. So you get this overall balanced profile that's really pleasant to drink. So that's the matcha temperature that you're looking at. What happens when you increase the water temperature to 100 degrees? It dramatically shifts the profile of the matcha. So it's going to make it a lot more astringent and a lot more bitter. And depending on the grade of your matcha, it's going to make it so astringent that it's going to be really difficult to drink. And that's how drastically the water temperature can shift the profile of the matcha. But if you're consuming the same matcha powder anyways, the whole leaf, how can the taste change so much? How could it be so different just by changing the water temperature? Again, some people say that it's because you're burning the leaf, which doesn't make sense because you're not using fire or anything. I'm sure you wondered why. How does this actually work? Now, let me give you another example. If you mix matcha with ice cold water or cold water, what happens to the profile? It changes again, but this time it's going to change in the opposite direction. It's going to reduce in terms of the astringency and the bitterness, so it's going to give you a little bit more of a clear tasting matcha. However, at the same time, it's going to also reduce some of its complicated layers of flavors as well. So it's going to taste a little bit more flat in a sense. Again, the question is, why does this change so much? How can the temperature make such a big impact to the taste of the matcha? Is it because your tongue or your senses, they just react differently depending on the temperature? No, it's not that. It's actually the taste of the matcha itself actually changes depending on how you make it or the temperature of which you make it. Okay, so here's the secret sauce. This is really the key important part of this video. So make sure you get a paper and pencil and you take note. The way you have to think about matcha when you prepare it is, don't think of it as a powdered tea. It's not a powdered tea, it's a loose leaf tea. Think of it as a loose leaf tea and everything will make sense. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that, Yuki, you've gone mad. Matcha is absolutely a powdered tea. It's not a loose leaf tea at all. But hear me out on this, it's going to make sense. This is how it works. Even though matcha powder is powdered, and in fact it's one of the finest particles you can find in the food world, however, it's not soluble. It's not water soluble. It does not dissolve in water. In fact, only 30 to 40% of matcha is actually water soluble, and the rest of it remains as small, tiny particles that's suspended in the water. And that's how matcha works. The part that you taste is mostly the part that gets dissolved in the water. And these are things like the amino acids, which contribute to the sweetness and the umami of the matcha, or the caffeine or the catechins, which contribute to the bitterness or the astringency of the matcha. So these are the things that are water soluble, and these are the things that you taste. But the way you're able to taste this, the way they become water soluble, is through extraction. It's the exact same as loose leaf tea. The compounds that remain trapped inside these suspended particles of matcha, they don't contribute too much to the taste. They're actually hidden. And that's key. If it doesn't get extracted, it's less noticeable. So here's the thing, the extraction doesn't happen instantly. You still need time for the particles to dissolve into the water. So there is still that time required for extraction. It's kind of like steeping. It's actually exact same as steeping for the loose leaf tea. It's just like the sencha or gyokuro, however, it's just happening in a much smaller scale. Now, this extraction is affected by several variables. Temperature is obviously a very important one. The time or the length of the mixing is another one, and I'm sure that this one caught you off guard, but that is a factor. And the quality of the matcha, obviously, is an important factor as well. Let's talk a little bit more about how the water temperature affects the extraction of the matcha. Now, first of all, the amino acids, these are really interesting because they're relatively water soluble. So even at water temperatures under 80 degrees, they will be able to extract into the water quite efficiently. However, on the other hand, catechins, these are relatively harder to extract. So you actually need water temperatures above 80 degrees to be able to extract them efficiently. And remember that the catechins are more of the astringency component of the tea. So that's why if you brew matcha at 80 to 85 degrees water temperature, then you're able to still extract the umami and the sweetness, the amino acids of the matcha, while you contain the astringency of the matcha as well. So that's why it's a sweet spot. Now the caffeine is a little bit different, but the caffeine is more of the bitterness component of the matcha. It still extracts at lower temperatures, but you would by increasing the water temperature to higher than 80 degrees, you'll get even more caffeine, so it will contribute to even more bitterness. So overall, that sweet spot of 80 to 85 degrees, what that gives you is a maximum sweetness and umami while containing the astringency and bitterness of the matcha as much as possible. If you go all the way to cold infusion, then you'll start to notice that the notes will reduce. You'll start to feel that the matcha might be a little bit more flat. And the reason is because it's the amino acids, not only the amino acids, but also the other compounds that contribute to the multiple complex flavors of the matcha itself. They're hard to extract when the water temperature is so cold. So that's why there's such a difference in the taste of the matcha depending on the water temperature. This also explains why, depending on how you prepare, for example, iced matcha, the taste will be so different. So example, if you make an iced matcha from a reicha style, which is you use 80 degrees water and dump ice in it to cool it down, or if you make matcha from more of an iced americano style where you make a matcha paste and then dump that matcha paste into cold water and make the matcha, these two are, even at the same matcha to water ratio, the taste will be significantly different. And this is, for example, one of the things that no one really teaches you. How are they different? Which is better? This really depends on the type of matcha you use. So if you're using a premium matcha with low astringency and lots of sweetness and great notes, then you want to take the reicha style, where you mix with hot water, 80 degrees water, make the matcha properly as an usucha, and then cool it down. Because in that way, you'll be able to get all the notes, all the flavors, and you still won't have that much astringency, so you can still enjoy it. If the quality of your matcha is low and it has lots of astringency in the matcha, the way you think about this is, how can I reduce and contain the astringency as much as possible? Now, for this case, then it's better to not use hot water or warmer water to make the matcha. So for this case, the matcha americano style, where you make matcha paste first and then dump it into cold water, this makes a lot more sense because you're able to contain the astringency of the matcha with this approach. Now let's touch on how the mixing time affects this. Yes, the mixing time as in how long it takes for you to whisk the matcha. Not only that, but also after you finish mixing the matcha, how long does it take for you to serve the matcha? So these are all contributors to the length of extraction of the matcha. So if you're someone who really likes the microfoam in the usucha, you might want that thick layer of microfoam. And to achieve that, you might be maybe spending a full minute to mix the matcha with a whisk. It will give you that really thick layer of microfoam. And then after that, you might be spending a minute or so to actually serve the matcha. While you do all of this, the extraction of the astringency, the bitterness, will continue to happen. And that will make the matcha obviously more astringent and bitter. And that might not be something that you've intended to do. But at the same time, it might give you also a little bit more of a full-bodied taste and more deeper notes. So it's not all that bad. It may not necessarily be all that bad. However, on the other hand, if you make a usucha, maybe whisk up the matcha in about 20 or 30 seconds, get a decent foam, and then you serve it right away, then you'll have a lighter tasting matcha, less astringency, and maybe even more pleasant. And you might like that more. So this really depends on what you like, and also, obviously, again, the quality of the matcha powder as well. Okay, so that's all we have for today. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope it was interesting. I hope it gave you an aha moment, like, oh, that's why kind of moment. If it did, please drop that into the comments below. I would love to read what your comments are. And then also make sure you give us a thumbs up as well. Okay, so see you in the next video.